Unlike the protracted trench warfare of the previous century, the war in the East was a quick, if bloody, affair. By the spring of 1911, the Russian winter had passed, and German motorized divisions, the first of their kind seen in war, tore through the streets of St. Petersburg as the royal family and the Duma fled for Moscow. General Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg was hailed in the Reichstag as the German Napoleon for his armed forces achieving this feat. The German optimization of mobilized warfare, tested in the Franco-Prussian War and perfected in the Yugoslav wars, was on display in the Lightning War, or Blitzkrieg operations performed to encircle and cut off much larger, slower Russian divisions. Further adding to Germany's fortunes was the support of many of the West Slavic minorities, who both engaged in guerrilla warfare against the Tsarist forces and supplied the oncoming German army with provisions and information. While Russian agents did their utmost to ensure that word of Friedrich Wilhelm's Dresden Declaration did not leak out, the radio declaration could not be held from the illiterate, non-Russian public forever, as both individual freedom fighters and entire patriotic movements were galvanized by the hope of independence, from the Baltic Sea to the shores of Ukraine. Although many Ruthenians, Ukrainians, and Lithuanians swelled German ranks, Józef Pilsudski, head of the underground Polish liberation movement, was hesitant to cast his country's lot with Germany, particularly when Germany herself held historically Polish land within her borders, which she would obviously not surrender. Nonetheless, the German juggernaut could not be stopped, and its destination was Moscow. To the south, just as peace seemed to settle on the Balkans, border tensions and old rivalries would only expand the Great War further. With Yugoslavia on the decline, Bulgaria became the rising star in the Balkans, having the lion's share of territory at the expense of her neighbors, particularly a jealous Greece and a bitter Ottoman Turkey. While the Greeks and Turks had no great love for each other, Sultan Yusuf understood the mutual benefits in loosely cooperating to dismantle the Bulgarian hegemony. Thus, while Russia was distracted with the German invasion, the Ottomans declared war on Bulgaria to reclaim the Aderna region, while Greece simultaneously stormed across the border to capture the Macedonian coastline. Both parties did not anticipate Russian involvement, but were unpleasantly surprised when Nicholas II, desperately clinging to his legitimacy as well as his crown, declared war upon both, honoring his alliance with Bulgaria and ordering General Anton Denikin to lead his forces across Anatolia. With Yusuf's great gamble backfiring, Turkish leaders began flocking to his rival, Mehmed, Yusuf's uncle and known Anglophile. Citing the immediate danger of being unprepared to fight Russia, Mehmed advocated for a white peace with the Tsar as soon as possible. The Sultan was about to send out feelers towards the Kremlin when his aide, Mustafa Kemal, proposed sending out feelers to Germany instead. As the German Empire was once again making substantial gains in the Russian Spring, Friedrich Wilhelm might support Ottoman interests in the Balkans and Asia at Russia's expense. Although leery of anchoring the Turkish state to German interests, the proud Yusuf did not wish to concede any small victory to his rival uncle. Thus, on April 7, 1910, Sultan Yusuf declared a jihad against the Russian Empire, citing its historical conquests against the Muslim faithful and the House of Islam. Sadly for the Sultan, the war would go poorly for the Ottomans, as Denikin's army was both stronger and more disciplined, as it quickly overwhelmed the local garrisons in Tabriz and along the Pontic coast. By January 1911, it became clear once again that Yusuf had bitten off more than he could chew. As Denikin approached the city of Ankara, the Sultan, already prone to fits of paranoia, killed himself, leaving his rival Mehmed as Mehmed VI, who would quickly ride out to make peace with Denikin. Greece would follow suit a few months later. The United States, on the other hand, was not proving to be the useful ally that the Kremlin had hoped. An amphibious invasion in Buenos Aires quickly overwhelmed the unprepared Argentine army, which quickly fled before the more disciplined American host. The following months would devolve into guerrilla warfare on the Pampas, shameful for Argentina, but a nuisance for America. In the hopes of ending this tiresome struggle, Manuel II sent messages to Washington to arrange for a white peace and a dissolution of the alliance with Germany. Brian hoped to push his luck further by solidifying an occupation of the whole Argentine and the establishment of a liberal republic on the southern cone. However, the Tsar's pleas that Moscow would soon fall forced the audacious president to accept Manuel's offer of peace. This peace marked the end of the Argentine-German alliance, as Manuel felt that Germany had left Argentina to the American dogs, serving as little more than a speed bump to stumble the American invasion of Europe. Nonetheless, Erich Ludendorff was quick to point out to the Kaiser that the Argentine alliance had served its purpose, as on January 25, 1912, Helmut von Moltke reported that he eyed the onion domes of St. Basil's as his troops had taken Moscow. In a vain attempt to escape, Nicholas II and the royal family hid in the back of a peasant's cart to escape the siege to the royal residences across the Urals. However, they would be identified and captured by a German cavalry contingent watching the roads to Ekaterinburg. With the Tsar's capture, a new provisionary government was created with the cooperation of Alexander Kerensky's Socialist Party and the remainder of the Russian army under Pyotr Wrangel. Apart from two radical ultra-nationalist deputies who wanted to continue the war, everyone in the Duma had rightly concluded that the war was lost. Britain and France were not coming to Russia's aid. America was too slow in arriving. St. Petersburg, Moscow, and now the Tsar himself were in German hands. Octoberist leader Nikolai Komyakov was sent to the now occupied St. Petersburg to negotiate a peace with Germany, the safe return of the Tsar's family, and the dismantling of the Russian Empire. The new provisionary government would establish itself as a republic, dismissing the royal family, but providing a handsome pension and offered transport for them and their possessions to England, where the Romanovs would live out the rest of their days. The Baltic region would be reconstituted into a German protectorate, while Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Finland, and a host of other Eastern European and Asian polities would be reorganized into independent republics in the German sphere of influence. Even in his death, Sultan Yusuf would be victorious, as the Russian gains of the past 50 years would be reversed. France defeated, Russia crushed, and Britain shaken. The First Great War had ended. While Europe bled, Asia burned. Yuan Shikai's grip on the new Beiyang Republic was always tenuous, as he became more and more dependent on the army to keep both vengeful monarchists and subversive liberals at bay. Ultimately, this dependence on the army would be his downfall, as a coup was orchestrated by the Ma clique in the west to place another military commander, Li Yuanhong, in as the new president of the republic. While Yuan had allies in Feng Yuxiang in Shaanxi and Sun Chuanfang in Anqing, they proved to be of little help to him when Ma forces stormed the capital in Peking. To the south, a new republican movement, the Kuomintang, would gain widespread support across the Guangdong province, the former heartland of Sun Yat-sen and his republican movement from decades prior. The movement would gain even greater support under the leadership of the young but energetic Chiang Kai-shek, who would take charge of the Guangdong military and launch an expedition against Yuan's allies in Hunan in 1915. By 1916, Feng Yuxiang, publicly known for his socialist sympathies, would lead the Shaanxi clique in a rebellion to establish a People's Republic in Beiyang. It was then that the dogged Shikai would be executed for betraying the wishes of the Chinese people, and a new People's Republic of China would be proclaimed. With all this political unrest gripping China, it was inevitable that the Japanese would dip their toes in the water to see how they could expand their empire. The opportunity came in the form of a false flag operation in which an alleged Chinese socialist attempted to blow up the railway line in Mukden, in the Manchurian province. This prompted the Japanese army in Korea to pour over the border into Manchuria and remove Zhang Zuolin from power and establish Manchuria as a protectorate and launchpad for future Chinese incursions. It was against this backdrop that China, like Europe, would enter an uneasy peace. But unlike Europe, there would not be a single hegemon or single ideology that would dominate. Not the nominally Republican Anqing in the south, the Japanese puppet in Manchukuo, or the good old-fashioned warlords of the Ma family. Time would be needed to lick one's wounds before taking up one's guns again. How to respond to the new German-dominated Europe. In the United Kingdom, the resounding victory by the German war machine was enough to give Parliament pause. While the Tory party almost celebrated avoiding getting dragged into a losing war, Lord Salisbury and the other parties were nonetheless faced with the European balance of power collapsing completely under German jackboots. Germany reigned supreme, while many of the other former great powers of Europe, Austria, Spain, France, Russia, were either collapsing or had already collapsed. While Britain at first attempted to maintain friendly relations with the liberal Friedrich Wilhelm, this relationship soon deteriorated with his death and the ascension of his son, Wilhelm II, in 1916. While Friedrich Wilhelm was commanding but cautious, Wilhelm II had a bravado and arrogance that was only heightened upon victory in the First Great War. One of his first acts as Kaiser was the expansion of the German Navy, the Kaiserliche Marine, to perform naval exercises in the North Sea, in defiance of the supposedly invincible British Royal Navy. So if friendship with Germany could not be maintained, what grand coalition could be formed to challenge German dominance? On the evening of August 15, 1912, a new submarine flotilla, under the command of Maximilian von Spee, was performing a naval exercise against a host of dummy ships in the Irish Sea, far from German home waters. Over the course of the night exercises, one of the submarines strayed far from the rest of the fleet and found a target to test out its new iron hull penetrating torpedoes and landed a solid hit. Unfortunately, its target was not one of the dummy ships, but rather the famed passenger liner, the RMS Titanic, on one of its many return voyages from New York City. Germany had gone too far this time, and the British public was clamoring for blood. Thus, Lord Salisbury, despite his misgivings regarding the readiness of the British armed forces, declined to declare war upon Germany, but gave the go-ahead to Admiral John Luce to launch a punitive expedition against the German port of Hamburg to punish Germany and curb her naval ambitions. The French government, interpreting the bombardment of Hamburg as a clandestine declaration of war, similarly poured her armed forces across the Moselle to reclaim the lost territories of Alsace-Lothringen. The Kaiser was outraged while the Reichstag was in chaos. All the artful diplomacy and martial prowess of the last 50 years threatened to be undone as many political pundits postulated that this was the start of a new coalition. Much like the others used to counter Napoleon Bonaparte, a new British-led coalition would see the nations of Europe keep German power in check. However, it was not to be. While the bombardment of Hamburg and the sinking of several prominent capital ships was a victory, it was a small one, as contingents of the Kaiserliche Marine still sailed in both the North and Baltic Seas, to say nothing of the German army now responding to the French attack. If Lord Salisbury hoped to unite Europe against Germany, he was sorely mistaken. Russia was still bitterly bruised in the war. Spain was allied with Germany and also mobilized her troops against France. The Netherlands could not withstand German aggression and so remained neutral. Italy, ever the wild card, actually took advantage of the chaos to snatch Corsica away from France, and the United States had once more resumed its isolationist policy following her victory against Argentina. Realizing that Britain and France could not fight half of Europe alone, and mindful that the new fragile imperial federation was in no position for a great war conflict, Lord Salisbury sent out messages for a peace treaty for the war he had blundered Britain and France into. As part of the peace treaty, he demanded that Germany cease naval exercises in British home waters of the Irish and North Seas, as well as hefty reparations for the civilian damage to the Titanic and her passengers. The reclamation of Alsace-Lotharingen was not discussed, much to France's chagrin. While the terms of the treaty seemed like an Anglo-French victory, Germany would ignore many of the terms of the treaty in future years, as they would resume naval exercises in the North Sea in 1930, a hollow victory for the short-lived Entente coalition. While Lord Salisbury would not last much longer in his office, he charted a course that future British governments would follow, a path of rearmament and alliance building. First was the Anglo-Japanese alliance. Much like Europe, Asia was quickly becoming a hotbed of political violence and chaos following the collapse of the Qing Empire in China. Although eager to protect British interests in China, Salisbury worried about being distracted and dragged into a land war in Asia, when Britain's focus needed to be upon the European continent. If, on the other hand, Britain was to respect, and in some cases even encourage, Japanese imperialism in China, Britain could protect her own imperialist interests in India and the Pacific. He also passed legislation to provide funding for the construction of infrastructure in Africa, the Dark Continent, where highways, supply chains, and all the necessities for fighting frontline wars were non-existent. Nicknamed Rhodey Roads, after the decorated Rhodes family that had invested heavily in Africa, these highways and railroads would serve to better connect both civilian and military hubs from South Africa to the Suez, as many in the House of Lords noted that any war with Germany will inevitably involve their African holdings. The sun was shining on Germany's pan-European empire, but Salisbury ensured that it would not set on Britain's. It would be no exaggeration to call Germany the mistress of Europe. From the Iberian Peninsula to the Dnieper River, German allies and puppets turned their gaze towards Berlin as Prussian constitutionalism, a blend of autocratic monarchy with liberal concessions, became the prevailing ideology on the continent. The slow but sure consolidation of power within the German Empire, whittling away at local principalities in favor of a centralized monarchy, reached its fruition in the aftermath of the First Great War, when Bohemia, long in Germany's orbit, finally joined the empire following a popular plebiscite. Further abroad, Wilhelm reorganized some of the Russian gains into German principalities ruled by his offspring, the United Baltic Duchy to his second son Eitel Friedrich, and the Turkestan Khanate to his third son Adalbert. These puppet states, along with the other friendly liberated republics of Belarus, Finland, Ukraine, and the Caucasian states, would form the basis for the later Rusland plans for deterring and containing Russian threats to the east. While the Kaiser and his war cabinet were confident in Germany's ability to fight France and Britain, they were loath to engage in another protracted conflict with Russia. If some of these new states could help share the load, it would prevent Germany from having to grapple with an exposed eastern flank. Thus was born the Rosen Plan, named after Chancellor Friedrich Rosen, a well-read Orientalist who helped steer public funds toward the rebuilding and strengthening of many Eastern European countries to form an Ostwall, or Eastern Wall, against the new Russian Republic. While Ukraine, Finland, and Belarus gladly accepted German aid, Pilsudski, first president of an independent Poland, remained aloof, still suspicious of German intentions and uneasy about German expansionism on the continent. He was right to be suspicious, as German ambitions in the Balkans were not fully satisfied. The Duchy of Dalmatia, previously held by Elizabeth Marie, the ill-fated daughter of Rudolf, was one of the last former Austrian territories held by Yugoslavia and eyed by Germany. In the past, the Karađorđević dynasty in Belgrade could rest easy knowing that Russia and the Western Entente would come to its aid against German aggression. However, following its early defeat in the First Great War and the lukewarm responses of the great powers, King Alexander would have to content himself with only the support of the Russian Republic under the leadership of her Vozhd, Pyotr Wrangel. In Germany, the opposition party in the Reichstag, the SPD, openly condemned such an imperialist adventure so soon after the last bloody war with Russia. Nonetheless, the Kaiser and the conservatives would have their way. Germany would push her claims on February 3, 1916, almost 4 years to the day that the Treaty of St. Petersburg was signed and the First Great War ended. The 9-month war, dubbed by newspapers at the time as the Little Great War, was a golden opportunity for Germany to test her skill at nation-building, to see how well the motley crew of Eastern republics fared against the Russian onslaught. The results were mostly positive, with Ukraine bearing the brunt of the Russian attack, the Baltic Duchy and the Turkish Khanate harassing Russia's long border, and Germany's erstwhile ally Romania providing a two-pronged attack on Yugoslavia, culminating in a quick siege of Belgrade and the swift surrender of Alexander. As expected, the newly formed Ukrainian army was successful at delaying Russian advancement, but doing little else as Vasily Boldriev's army laid siege to the capital of Kiev, leading to Hetman Pavlos Skoropadsky's surrender to Russian forces. Following the capture and looting of Kiev, the Wrangel government was content to accept German demands, satisfied that they had at least exposed chinks in the German armor. Germany was reluctant to continue the war to push for reparations, much to the frustration of the battled Ukrainians, whose capital was just sacked. Nonetheless, Ukraine could not complain too loudly about their German benefactors, as the Russian threat still loomed large and no other great power would come to their aid. With the conclusion of the 9-month war, Wilhelm II had accomplished the dream of his father, grandfather, and all pan-German nationalists from the previous century: the unification of all German-speaking peoples into a single polity. While many of the peoples living within her borders did not speak German, a Deutschification process would work towards integrating the various Slavic minorities into the empire. As for the other nations of Europe, both East and West, they overwhelmingly pursued warmer relations with Berlin, as it was quickly becoming the center of Europe. As peace brought industry, Wilhelmine Germany would undergo major cultural and social changes, as the odd blend of traditional structures and modern thought seemed to work hand in hand in bringing the empire into a new golden age. The 20th century would be a German one. Thanks for watching.